Our attention now turns to a much broader form of Java coding where we're going to be building websites. And so before we get into that, I want to start off with a little bit of some high-level session on generally how does the internet work. So why am I going to talk about this? Well, one reason, which might seem a little bit not intuitive, is I had a boss, this was one of his favorite questions to ask to coding candidates, because he was always shocked how few people could reasonably give an answer to how the internet works. I'm not saying that makes you a better coder per se, but it certainly makes you a better engineer of systems for sure. I mean, a coder is the person who understands codes. If you want to understand the bigger picture and how things work, then you should understand the context, the system in which you live. So we've talked about networking. We've talked about sockets. The basics of what we started off in this class is the basics of what makes up the internet. We go from one IP address to another IP address. We go from our application to a port number on another IP address. It's a direct connection, known as TCP/IP. There's something else called UDP/IP. It's another format inside of there. We're not messing with that for now. That's not what we're talking about. That's not what we're interested in. When we go through these connections, we're using this basic fundamental connection of the web that we've already built upon in order to be able to do all this cool website stuff. So the networking within our website has several pieces that actually come together to make this happen. As I said, we could build a website with the technology we've worked on. We could build a web server. We could build web pages to make this stuff happen. There's just apps that do it for us, but we understand the technology. So the pieces that help us make this happen, is we start with the browser. That's our people interface. That's what a person looks at in order to be able to make their work happen, right? The next piece of that, though, is when I go to my browser, I don't type in an IP address. I type in, quite specifically, a URL, like google.com or ctuonline.com or .edu or whatever it's going to be. At that point, what it's doing for me is it's going to what's called a domain name server. It's a server whose job out there is to understand that text and match it up to an IP address that is the actual server IP address. It basically looks up, it's a phone number lookup service, if you will, where it looks up IP addresses more specifically. And so that goes to the server, which hits the web server itself. Now, the web server is both the hardware and the software in terms. We care about the software as far as this discussion goes. So it hits the computer hardware, and on that hardware is an application called the web server, which is listening on port 80 and probably on port 443 as well. That's the default HTTP and HTTPS ports. And it's going to listen to that request. It's going to do all the ones and zeros socket stuff that we saw and coded the first weeks here. And it's going to reply to that server based off of the results of what our web application, the code that we write, is going to be doing. So the way they talk, as we kind of figured it out, is it's not ones and zeros. It's formatted for the web, but it's also very clearly formatted in a way that's going to help us communicate, called HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It is stateless, and it is required information to be able to send information and receive information over browsers. It's basically a protocol that they defined to send this stuff called hypertext. So what do we mean by hypertext? Well, HTTP, hypertext, is sending and receiving HTML, the hypertext markup language. That's the data that's going across it back and forth, and hopefully you've seen HTML before. You probably at least used it in a browser, maybe even coded a little bit of it. It's the way we defined documents where browsers know how to take that and turn it into the prettiness that you see. Pictures here and text there, and it's bold here and blinky there and things like that. So most of the work we need to do is actually done for us through all of this general setup. We don't need to write a client here. The browser's already done that. They use Firefox, or they use Internet Explorer, they use Chrome, or whatever they're going to use inside of their Safari. They can use that in order to be able to go and access the information on the website. So we don't need to handle the requests. We don't need it for a server side of this. The web server does that. It creates the server socket. It receives that information. It translates the HTTP, the protocol stuff. The HTTP protocol is done by the Java web server that's written on top of that. So all we need to do is write functionality and respond using HTML. So our job is ridiculously simple compared to everything that's out there we had to do for a basic introduction app. The reason because of this, that everything's taken care of, is because these two basic Java web component technologies. The first is called a servlet. And a servlet is some basic code that allows us to translate the HTTP protocol into Java methods. So when I go and try and get a page, call this method. When I'm trying to post data to a page, go call this other method. And then there's this technology called Java Server Pages, which helps us more easily render HTML by making basically a web page-ish type thing that has some Java code squeezed in inside of that. So we're going to take a look at what these technologies are and how they help us build web pages.